Welcome to the Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do podcast with your host, Tom Singer. In each episode, we explore the interesting lives of business leaders, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and others who have a healthy dose of the entrepreneurial spirit. It is time to explore something cool. Now, here is your host, Tom Singer.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do. Thank you so much for pulling your chair up to the Cool Kids table. If you've never listened to an episode of this show before, my goal is to bring you a variety of interviews with really cool people who are entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, business leaders, people who have been entrepreneurs since the day they were born, and people who looked at 60 years old and said, oh my God, my ladder is against the wrong wall, I better start over, and everything in between. If you like the show, jump over to iTunes and leave a review. It makes my day so much better when someone leaves a new review. So before we get going with today's interview, I have to thank the first sponsor of this episode, and that is my friends at Amplifier. Now, many of you offer physical products to your fans and your customers, but dealing with the physical stuff, that can be a pain, and it steals all of your precious time. Well, my buddies over at Amplifier, they blend order fulfillment, screen printing, and on-demand production into a single self-service platform that you control. And I'm using them because I have those new Try New Things t-shirts, and they're the ones who are printing those for me, and they're awesome to work with. They can integrate your e-commerce shop and help drive your giveaway campaigns. They are great for giant internet powerhouse companies as well as entrepreneurs who are just starting out. And on-demand means no inventory risk. But as you grow, you can stock up on inventory, and Amplifier can take care of all of that for you. Go to amplifier.com/coolthings and sign up today. So speaking of today's show, I have Steven Sashen, and he is from Xero Shoes. And when I first met him, one of the things that struck me is he found out that I might be hiking the Appalachian Trail in 6 years, and they have shoes that are going to be really cool for that. Also, turns out he has done a lot of things. He's never really had the regular job. He's been an entrepreneur all along. I think he was afraid he was just going to be smarter than anyone who would be his boss, and he's probably right about that. He's done a whole bunch of things, including having done some voiceover work and some stand-up, as well as having started a whole bunch of companies. And I don't even know where today's interview is going to go because we only have a half hour, and this guy has done so many things as an entrepreneur. It's crazy. So Steven Sashen, welcome to Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are, and then let's talk about Xero Shoes.
Yeah, I don't know the who I am part. I literally don't have. It's funny when my wife and I would be at dinner parties and people would say, what does your husband do? I would literally leave and let her just try and take that one on because it's just way too much. So I'm just a guy who never had a job. I think I'm just a few years too old to have gotten Ritalin, which would have knocked it out of me. So instead, I've since I was about 6. And you know what? The first job I had, I just realized, was polishing my dad's shoes. Once he told me it was 25 cents for a pair of shoes and 50 cents for a pair of boots. His shoes were notoriously and continually dirty. And so that was my first gig. And then from the time I was 13, I did magic at kids' birthday parties for a living. And I was actually a professional magician for a while. Then that moved into stand-up comedy. And that turned into somehow getting a master's degree in film at Columbia University. While I was doing that, I invented what became the industry standard word processing software for film and television writers. I was doing stand-up at that same time and acting at that same time. And actually, one of my favorite gigs ever, I did a lot of voiceover work. And I think I made about $25,000 for doing the following. Here we go. Ready? Fire. That was it. And I was in and out of the studio that long. And that was like they played that forever.
What was that for?
It was an Army commercial. The Army did something really interesting. They would do voiceover stuff with real actors, and well, whatever that means, with actors. I don't know if there's a thing called a real actor. And then if the radio commercial went well, then they would do that same commercial on video with actual people in the service. So we were kind of a test bed for them. But that was very entertaining. I'd be at comedy clubs and I'd hear that commercial. It's like, okay, get ready, fire. Yeah, that was me. And of course, nobody believed it.
So let's talk a little bit about the comedy before we get into the world of shoes.
Sure.
So I started in March of this year going to open mic nights, and I've done 26 of them around the country because I travel so much as a professional speaker. I'm often in hotel rooms, and I could either watch Netflix or I could go to open mic night. And I figured out just a few months ago, at age 51 at the time, 52 now, that it was kind of fun, and it's been stretching me. I actually call it cross-training for my speaking career because stand-up, I think, is the hardest use of the spoken word. I've done 400 podcasts. I have given 800 professional speeches. I've done improv. I was in a short film. I did acting in high school. Stand-up is hard, and it really pushes you and gives you a whole new sense of humility and confidence all at once. So let's talk a little bit about your experience actually doing stand-up professionally, because I only go to open mic nights.
Well, you sort of nailed it. I mean, it's a very peculiar skill. It's a very peculiar art because there are certain unspoken limitations. Like you need to get a laugh every X number of seconds, or if you're not doing it over those number of seconds, the laugh that comes after has to be worth the wait. And the nature of comedy has changed quite a bit. Jerry Seinfeld made a comment about this recently, that lately the trend in comedy is to tell funny stories from your life, which is okay, but it's not the same as writing jokes. And so the thing about doing stand-up is that you are simultaneously crafting a persona while you're finding out who you are and what you want to say and how you want to say it, under this limitation of having to get a particular response from people every X number of seconds. And the confidence thing, undeniable. One of the things that I can tell you, having done stand-up for a living for 10 years, is that in a situation like this, being on a podcast or speaking for anything, I'm totally fearless. Or more accurately, I just don't care because I'm confident that I can handle whatever happens in some way, because I've just seen it. It's like when you see a comic get heckled, a number of comics have said this, like, what are you thinking, you idiot? I do this for a living. There's nothing you're going to say that I haven't heard before. And if you have, that'll be fun because then I'll riff off that and still destroy you. So it's there. I'll never forget, I met Jackie Mason at a show once. I was performing. Jackie was in the audience with a couple of very hot, let's call them hookers. And he came up to me, just for fun. He came up to me after the show and he goes, "Hey, you're a very funny guy. How long have you been doing this? 2.5 years?" And I'm like, holy crap, how'd you figure that out? And there's this weird thing that happens over time, and time is the only way you get it, stage time, where you just develop a certain kind of, again, let's call it a confidence, or more accurately, a lack of concern for how it goes. You trust yourself enough to not try to push the envelope. Like people ask me, and I'm going to stop ranting in a second. People ask me often when they hear that I did comedy, they ask me if I go to comedy shows. And I say, by and large, no, because I'm allergic to the stench of desperation. And when you're just starting comedy, and I'm not saying this is you, but for most of us just starting comedy, we're trying so hard to get that response. And that trying eventually happily goes away. And then you're able to be present and just respond and deal with whatever happens.
One of the things that happened to me is a friend of mine who's a professional comic brought me to an open mic night in New York City. So the first time I ever did it, I was in Manhattan, in Greenwich Village at a comedy club doing this thing. And afterwards, the comics who were there, they announced it was my first time ever doing stand-up. And of course, it's supportive that way. I've been at other shows where it's someone's first time and everybody's really clappy about it.
Right.
But I worked it into my bit that this was my first time and everybody cheered. And then afterwards, one of the comics came up in the bar and he goes, "That was your first time?" He goes, and I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "You have an amazing stage presence." He goes, "Obviously,
Right.
You need to figure out the funny a little bit more." But
Right.
he goes, "But you have an amazing stage presence." And, what he didn't know is I've given 800 professional speeches.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
while I was scared of the comedy part of it, being in front of an audience didn't freak me out. And now that I've done this 26 open mic nights, it definitely is helping me that my stage presence.
It's just a very different thing. And what happens early on is it just goes up and down. Like we joked, the worst thing that could happen is that your first gig goes well, because then there's nowhere for it to go but down. And guaranteed the next, over the next couple, you're going to have one where that same act gets nothing.
Oh, I've literally had it where it's like, they're like, "Yay, and now the old guy is sitting down."
Yeah,
I've also noticed that at open mic night, it's usually just comics, and they're usually 25-year-old guys talking about their sexual parts. So it's,
Right.
I'm sort of the anomaly being in my 50s. But I have found it to be a very interesting thing. And it's always fun when I see people who have been comics at one point in their life who are very successful in their career. Do you think there's a tie into acting and comedy and entrepreneurship?
Well, I think there's a psychological tie-in that we're independent and typically smarter than the average bear. And I'm not trying to pat myself on the back. It's like if you hang out in a comedy club at the bar with the comics, most of the conversation is things like, did you see that thing on the Discovery Channel yesterday? That was amazing. Did you watch that thing about quantum mechanics? Holy crap, I didn't realize that there was a singularity. I mean, it's ridiculous. And so so there's the iconoclastic thing and the intelligent thing and the don't tell me what to do thing. And so I think there's definitely a psychological connection.
So let's talk about your current company. What is Xero Shoes? How did it start? And why do we care?
Sure. So think about your feet at the end of the day. You come home, you take off your shoes. Do you feel better? And if the answer is yes, it's because you've been wearing the wrong shoes. So your feet are amazing. You have a quarter of the bones and joints of your entire body in your feet and ankles. You have more nerve endings in your soles than anywhere but your fingertips and your lips. And that's not an accident. You're supposed to use these things. They're supposed to bend and flex and feel the world. And Xero shoes let you do that. So they have a wide toe box so your toes can spread and relax. They're not elevated in the heel, so it doesn't mess with your posture. They're super thin, so you're low to the ground for balance and agility. They're crazy flexible, so your feet can do that bending thing I was talking about. And the soles give you the right combination of feedback, so your brain knows what's going on at the other end of your body and can control your whole body, but also lets you have the protection you need for anything you want to do. So we have casual and performance shoes and sandals that people use for everything from taking a walk to running ultra marathons, and they're all based on this foot first idea. Or what was the line that I literally woke up this morning thinking, happiness your feet deserve was the line that I swear to God I woke up thinking of this morning, and I've got to write that down. So so that's what we do. And if you think about like normal shoes, they're typically comfortable only when you take them off your feet. You know, they're not shaped the way your feet are. They don't move the way your feet do. Here's a crazy thing. In the 50 plus years that we've had athletic shoes that we're familiar with, that have pointy toes, elevated heels, wide flared soles, arch support, etc., there's zero evidence that those things provide any benefit in reducing injury and improving performance. Zero. Even though there's a huge motivation for doing that. As a friend of mine from Harvard put it, she says, look, in the 60s, the running shoes were all thin leather soles and basketball shoes were Chuck Taylors, and we weren't getting the injuries that we get now. What were you guys doing? She was saying to guys from Brooks and Adidas, what are you guys doing and why? And the only response that they had was, well, it's not like everyone's going to wear Xero shoes right away. But, that tells me I've got a big gaping hole I can move into.
So what made you go from all the things you've done to footwear?
Well, it was an accident. I got back into sprinting 11 years ago when I was 45 and was getting injured pretty much constantly. And one day a friend of mine, after a couple of years, said, why don't you take off your shoes and see what you learn from running barefoot? And what I learned instantly was what I was doing wrong that was causing my injuries, and more importantly, how to fix it. So I wanted that natural movement experience as often as I could have it. And I started making sandals just from this 10,000-year-old idea, just a sheet of rubber and some string to hold it on your foot. And people kept asking for them more and more and more. And finally, this one guy says, hey, if you had a website, I'd put you in this book I'm writing about barefoot running. And so I had, by that time, built maybe 500 websites. So I rush home and I pitch this idea to my wife, who tells me it is a horrible idea. And I agreed, I'm a good husband. And she goes to bed around 9. And by 10, I had a website up. And it just took off. What we thought was going to be maybe a car payment within 2 months was clearly our full-time job. And then it's just grown from there, from just being a do-it-yourself sandal-making kit company to being a full aspirational lifestyle brand with shoes that people wear for everything you can imagine.
So you work with your wife, and you started the business by not listening to her. How does that? How do those two things go together? Well,
she did kind of growl at me the next morning, and I said, "Look, at the time we were starting a search engine optimization business, and I said, look, it's a good case study. The people that are ranking for the keywords I care about, they're there by accident. I can own this in a few months," and I did. So that calmed her down then. But we never really talked about starting the business. We just kind of did it, and it just so happens that we have really complementary skill sets. She's the organizational, financial, HR kind of person, and I'm the product marketing guy. And so working with my wife has been by far the greatest, most satisfying thing in my life. She's whiz bang smart. I have watched her grow into this incredible business person. I mean, she already started out as one, and just she's evolved in a way that I just marvel at. And we really like it. I mean, it's been great for us. And besides, she owns 96% of the stocks. What else am I going to say?
You got to be nice to her when that's the way it works.
Yeah.
So what advice do you have for someone who wants to go and start a business? I mean, that's all you've done is sort of created your own way. You've just got a machete. Yeah. You're hacking your way through the forest. What do you say to somebody else who's like, I want that life?
Yeah, I say get a government job with a pension. I'm totally serious.
And so if they won't listen to that advice, then what do you tell them?
What are you going to do? I mean, this is the thing. That advice, I'm totally serious. Like if someone had talked me into it, it was a really good gig. I'm 56 right now, and I have friends who are retiring from their government jobs and pensions, and they literally don't know how to spend all the money. And so, there are government jobs that would have been satisfying. You just would have had to have really walked me through that and showed me that. I just didn't know it. I wouldn't have believed it then. So if I say get a government job with a pension, and if you're a real entrepreneur, there's no way that's going to talk you out of your idea, no matter how stupid it is, and God knows it probably is. But if that gives you any pause whatsoever, get a government job with a pension. This is not for the faint of heart.
Well, I do have a friend who is launching a very successful speaking career after a career, and he's my age, he's early mid-50s, after a long, full career in the FBI, and he's retiring with a pension that is a great number per month.
Yeah.
So he has no fear that if his speaking career didn't work out, everything's taken care of, and yet he's crushing it. He's making more money speaking than he did as an FBI agent, and he's got this full pension. So there was something to be said for, 30-year 25 years working in the government, taking the pension, and then starting his entrepreneurial venture because he's got that safety net. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, people, I think, I don't know that there's two kind of people in the world, people who divide the world into two and others who don't. But there's undeniably a different flavor for someone who is willing. Someone asked Lane and I once something about how we take this risk. And we said, well, we just don't perceive it as a risk. It is. It's ridiculous. I mean, we are currently personally guaranteeing over $2 million in debt. But hey, we also have no assets, so there's no downside really. But it's for people, it's kind of like stand-up actually. Some people say, well, doing stand-up sounds really crazy and risky. Those of us who've done it for a living, I don't remember ever hearing anyone who's done that for a living think of it that way.
Well, and the stand-up, I don't see it really as a risk because, like I said, I'm right now I've just done open mic nights, but even so, that's a 3 to 5 minute thing. And I've had some where people have said, wow, dude, for being brand new, you were the funniest guy tonight. I've had some where people are like, really don't quit your day job, old man. And yet it's over in 3 or 4 minutes and I'm growing and I'm learning. There's no downside to it, but I can't tell you how many of my friends are like, dude, you're my hero. I would never do that. And I'm like, why not?
There's that whole thing that they say public speaking is people's biggest fear. And of course, stand-up comedy is a subset of that where, look, what's the worst thing that's going to happen is people stare at you for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and then they walk away. It was actually, I did a gig once. It was going to be on television, and they taped me at Catch a Rising Star in New York, and then the next night a gig out on the road in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I did the exact same set. A Catch on the first night, killed. Bethlehem the next night, couldn't buy a laugh. And it was really, this is going to be on national television, so it was a little upsetting. But, my girlfriend walked in with a giant piece of chocolate cake naked, and it was all over in 20 minutes. We were fine.
Hey, that's all it takes.
Yes, she was a very smart woman. She knew that naked and chocolate cake was a good combination.
Well, there you go. Now, is that girlfriend your wife?
No. This girlfriend is actually a very famous producer, director, writer now.
Oh, well, then she lost you, but she did okay.
She did fine.
Awesome.
She's a wonderful, smart, brilliant person.
Awesome. Hey, so I study this whole thing. I call it the paradox of potential. I pay a lot of attention to, people start businesses and they're like, oh my gosh, I have so much potential. Or their investors are like, oh my gosh, there is so much potential. And then you look ahead and of all the entrepreneurs who go out and start things, not everybody makes it across that gap between potential and results. But some people do. How come you think some people go farther to success where other people fall into the ravine? What's the delta?
Luck.
Expand. No, yeah, I want you to expand on luck. And to be honest with you, we just talked about this several episodes ago. Luck's a real thing in entrepreneurship. I'm not discrediting your answer because this is a real thing.
Look, when I was in film school, one of my teachers was the now late director Milos Forman. And someone said to Milos, so how do you make a good movie? And he says, 90% of making a movie is casting. And the other 10% is casting. And I say the same thing about business. 90% of success is luck, and the other 10% is luck. Oh, and then there's a whole other 100% that's working your ass off. So totally separate 100%. And I'm being completely serious. I mean, when I think about the number of incredibly lucky things that have happened for us that have allowed us to survive this far. We've been doing this now for almost 9 years. And again, started it as a little hobby business selling a funky little $20 do-it-yourself sandal making kit. But when I think of the luck factor, it is massive. And that doesn't discount the working our butts off and being smart people factor. But if I got rid of the luck part, none of this would be here. None of it.
So, but don't you think that part of it is you have to set yourself up for luck? Like recently, I've gotten a couple of really good leads to speak at conferences from people who listen to my podcast, and they happen to belong to an association, and they told the association manager.
I mean, look, but I don't know that that's setting yourself up for luck as much as it's just let's call it something like the law of large numbers. If you put yourself out there, look, if you're at a party and someone asks you what you do and you don't talk about what you do, then you haven't set yourself up for some possible thing. It's just math. Or if, I was at an event once and I can't remember exactly what it was, but something for internet marketers. And I said, so how many of you own a company? And everyone raised their hand. I said, how many of you have a logo for your company? Everyone raises your hand. I said, and why aren't any of you wearing a shirt with your damn logo on it right now? And, I'm always, there's your stuff right behind you. And I'm normally, if I'm on a podcast, I'm normally wearing a Xero Shoes t-shirt. Now I'm wearing my bathrobe because I'm getting over being sick as a dog, and not trying to prove that you can make money in your underwear.
Yeah, we're not recording the video, but I can see him, and he looks like he's at a spa. He's got his hair up in a man bun, and he's got a big, fluffy, expensive white robe on. And I'm like thinking, this guy's at the Four Seasons.
This is $20 at Kohl's. But nonetheless, what the hell were we just talking about?
Setting yourself up for luck.
Set yourself up. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, anytime you're being more visible, you're making yourself more visible. I don't know that that's luck. Look, here's the difference between setting yourself up for luck. And actually, I can't draw the line, but I'll say it this way anyway. So here's the luck part. A friend of ours is out walking his dog one day. He normally doesn't. His wife does. He bumps into a guy that his dog knows. So the dogs are talking, and while the dogs are talking, the guys start talking. My friend says to this other guy, what do you do? He says, I've been a footwear designer for 30 years. I just left Crocs. My friend says, oh, you should meet Steven and Lena. They started a shoe company. This guy, Dennis, says, sure, here's my phone number. And he hands our friend the phone number, who hands it to us. I sat on it for a couple of months thinking, what would a guy who was the lead designer at Crocs want to do with a do-it-yourself sandal making company? This is funky little thing that we're running out of a corner of a spare bedroom. Anyway, I eventually call him. We had a great time. It turns out, he's now our lead designer. Mm-hmm. So the lucky part is these two guys were walking their dogs when normally their wives do, and then the serendipity of Dennis having just left Crocs and liking what we're doing and all the rest. The not luck part is that, this guy who's a friend of ours knew what we did and happened to be, and so that's really it, is that we were telling everyone what we did.
Right. So, well, that's my belief in setting yourself up is A, you were taking action and doing what you're doing. B, you let people know. And that was my point is, somebody was saying, oh, you're lucky that your podcast spins off business. And I'm like, I don't know that that's luck. It means 4 years of interviewing 350 or 370 people. And it means a couple of people listen who like the show.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're onto it. I mean, just at that level, the word luck is a little wacky because it's sort of like saying you're lucky if you advertise and someone buys your product. It's like, no. You did this deliberate thing that set you up for this situation to happen. And so sometimes you get better situations than others. Sometimes someone buys one, sometimes someone buys 10 of whatever you're selling.
Well, and I have a lot of friends and somebody says, oh, he's an overnight success. Yeah, well, for 10 years, he barely made his mortgage and then he hit. Yeah. And it's like, is that really an overnight success or is that someone who was out there, fighting the good fight and it worked out?
We're about to hit the 9-year mark, and it just gets progressively better every year. But we thought, we'd be out of here at 3 years. We thought at the 4-year mark, maybe someone's going to make us an offer. We thought, it just keeps, it does what it does. And I have friends who had started companies where they met the right person at the right time and made huge amounts of money before they even had anything more than a napkin drawing. It does what it does.
So I've got more questions for you, Stephen, but first I have to thank the other sponsor of this episode. So this episode is brought to you by Podfly Productions. Podfly takes the time and the headache out of creating your own podcast. Podfly sets you up with the right equipment, training, and guidance to ensure that you're going to sound amazing. They do all the heavy lifting and the technical work so that you can focus on creating great content, growing your audience, and interviewing really cool people like Steven Sashen. Hey, if you want to start a podcast, and I know some of you do, jump over to podfly.net/cool things and check out the offer that they have for the listeners of this show. And that offer is they give you a little discount on using their services. And I will tell you, they're the best vendor I've ever worked with at any time in my career. Love me some Podfly. So, Stephen, I call the show Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do. So my question for you is, what's the coolest thing you're doing with Xero Shoes right now?
Changing the world. That's it. I mean, literally. It sounds hyperbolic when I say it, but when you design shoes based on feet rather than based on just what everyone else has done, because that's the way it's happened for the last 50 years, you change people's lives. I mean, this is actually Lena's line. She says there's enough shoe companies and enough shoes out there that the last thing the world needs is another one of either, unless what you're doing changes people's lives. And the number of emails and phone calls and reviews we have with that phrase in it is huge. And it does it because, A, they're super, super comfy because they're way next to nothing. They let your feet spread and move naturally. But there's also research that shows that that kind of thing, that letting your feet work the way they're supposed to work, is crazy good for you. So it can do things like help with plantar fasciitis and knee osteoarthritis and patellar tendonitis and back pain and hip pain and knee pain and all these things that could become problems when you don't let your feet do their job. So that's our biggest thing, is that what we're really trying to do is make natural movement as obvious a choice as natural food currently is, where people see it as the obvious, healthy, better thing to do. And that's what motivates us. The emails that we get every day from people saying, holy smokes, I'm walking, running, hiking pain-free for the first time ever or in years, that's what gets us out of bed.
That's awesome. Now I'm excited. I want a pair of shoes.
Thank you. And we call it our movement of trying to get people to understand natural movement. And Lena likes to say, sometimes there are companies who will do things to support other ventures or other initiatives they have. And while we do that, and I'll mention that in a second, our biggest thing is that what we're doing is the mission. And so we're helping other people experience it in other ways. We support a company called Souls for Souls and another called One World Running that gets footwear to people in third world countries where they need footwear to do things like get into school or get a job, and they don't have any. And we're happy that we're able to give them footwear that's actually good for them.
That's awesome. So I love to ask the people who come on this show who it is in the world of entrepreneurship that they admire. Because I think entrepreneurs, I think we're observers. So when you look out into the entrepreneur-sphere, who do you say, hey, he or she, they're doing cool stuff?
I don't have a good answer for that because how do I want to think of it? I'll say this in the weirdest way I can think of. I don't care what anyone else is doing because I'm not them. So like when someone says, hey, we're going to meet Richard Branson, I go, whatever. I mean, I want to get some shoes on his feet and have him call 100 of his closest friends, but I'm not going to necessarily learn something that I can do from Richard Branson. And the reason that I can say this is, or that I will say this, is think of the number of people who've met Richard Branson with the idea of learning how to be the next Richard Branson, and how many Richard Bransons are there? Arguably less than one. Even Richard Branson isn't Richard Branson. He is not the way we think of him. I mean, there's a lot of it that is, but if you knew him personally, you would find a whole rash of concepts and traits and things that are not what you imagine, that are not part of his public persona. So people that I know who've been very, let's call it successful, when I know them personally, I neither admire nor disrespect them. That's just them doing what they did, and it had that result. And sometimes I learn some things technically, or, I get introduced to people because they know other people that I don't know. But by and large, I'll say it this way, I just don't have time to pay attention to what anyone else is doing and turn that into a thing. And part of it is also I'm 56, I mean, how much am I going to change my brain at this point?
Hey, the last question I ask everybody is, and you touched on this a little bit, so I want you to go a little deeper. What do you do to give back to the greater good? Because I love it when I hear entrepreneurs who find a way to give back, and sometimes they tie their initiative to the way they give back. My TED Talk just released, and it's called The Art of Giving Small. Every time I give a speech and I get a check, we give a little piece of that to 2 children's hospitals. And over the years, it's grown to $70,000. And it's like, how did that happen? I'm not rich. How did we raise $70,000? And it became a TED Talk. And
that's great.
So I love to hear what other people do, because I think it's exciting when you hear how people find their method to give back to the greater good.
Yeah, and just to dive in a tiny bit deeper, when we started this, one of the inspirations for Xero Shoes was the Tarahumara Indians in the Copper Canyon in Mexico, who are famous for running ultramarathons either barefoot or in huarache sandals, which are sandals they make out of a scrap of tire, just they lace their foot with some leather. And these are people who run as part of their life. They also are sometimes called rarumari, which are the running people. And these people will run for hundreds of miles well into their 70s and 80s without injuries and without problems. And so they inspired us. And so we've been giving back to them since day one. We were giving a percentage of the money we were making selling certain products to them since day one. This is not a percentage of profits. This was money off the top when we couldn't, quote, afford to do it, but we really felt indebted to them. And we still do. We support them through the Tarahumara Children's Hospital Fund, which the Tarahumara are also suffering from drought and poverty and problems with food and drug cartels coming in and taking over their area. It's very remote and tricky to navigate. And so they've been really, really struggling. And so we're supporting them that way. And again, as I mentioned, the Souls for Souls and One World Running, Lane and I, we're looking to expand our philanthropic activity. And we did an equity crowdfunding raise last year. And one of the bonuses we gave to people who invested certain amounts of money is that they could nominate charities that we would be supporting. So we want to expand what we're doing philanthropically. We want to do it in a way that's organic to what we're doing and who we are, not just randomly giving money to somewhere or doing something that sounds good that's different than what it is. Like, hey, you buy a pair of our shoes, we're going to give a pair of cheap plastic flip-flops to people somewhere else. Like, no, that's not interesting. So to find something that's authentic other than what we're doing just with our movement is one of our ongoing conversations and goals.
And that's kind of part of what I try to teach people is find something that matters to you. It can't just be it can't be a random thing. The reason we give to Children's Hospital is we give for research for kids born with craniofacial abnormalities is our daughter had to have her skull rebuilt as an infant. And so that's our cause. And, it turns out one in something like 5,000 kids have some sort of a craniofacial issue, whether it's the bones like Kate had or whether it's things like cleft palate. It all falls into that same thing. It can be tissue or it can be bone, but it's more common and nobody knows. And so that's our cause because we went through it. The good news is Kate is 16. She's precocious. She's beautiful. She's a straight A student. She's kind of a force to be reckoned with. And she teases me all the time that, as a professional speaker, I wanted to give a TEDx talk. I didn't want to speak about what I spoke about in my day-to-day stuff, but I thought it'd be fun to get to do a TEDx. She actually did a TEDx speech long before I did. 6 months before I did, but still she's like, yeah, Dad, you always wanted to do a TED talk and one fell into my lap and I did it before you.
Oh, that's great. Lane and I, before we started Xero Shoes, we were retired. We back in the 99, 2000, we'd done some clever real estate investing, and around 2006, we went, hey, this is going to crash, and we got out. But during that time where we had enough passive income to support ourselves without having to do anything, we had a $1,000 a month charitable contribution fund. And after the first couple of months of supporting the things that we already knew and believed in and liked, we actually got kind of bored. And we just were looking for other things that were inspiring. And it was really fun because what we would do is we would just wait until something just landed in our lap, until something just showed up. We'd be listening to the radio. We'd meet someone who would say, hey, there's this thing. And invariably, by the end of the month, there was always something that happened. Little things, like one of my favorites, we walked into one of those vans that the Humane Society had where they had puppies and kittens. And on the way out, I said, can I give you guys a donation? And they said, yeah, I guess. And so while they're talking to my wife, I write a check for $500. And that was what we had left that month. And I folded up and handed them the check. And we thanked them for letting us pet the puppies and the kitties. And we walked out. And then about 2 steps outside the door from the van, we just hear, oh, my God. So they had never seen anything like that. And a friend of mine managed a charitable organization that's worth billions. And he said, I don't think you get it. If you gave us $1,000, you would be in the top 1% of the top 1% of donors. That's how little people typically give. And we were shocked to hear that. So I guess that's my way of saying any little bit you do can make a much bigger difference than you would think. Most people do very, very little, and it doesn't take a lot to do a lot.
And a lot of people think that giving small doesn't, that's why I call it the art of giving small. A lot of people think that doing something like that doesn't matter. And whether you do it where you spread it around, or like we've done, we've picked one charity and we've done it now for 12 or 13, 14 years, where we have constantly, kind of trickled in and sort of tracked it, it's like that becomes real money, and it really does make a difference. And I think people think, oh, charities only care about the big checks.
No.
And most charities, they do care about the big checks. Those are nice, but they really rely on sort of that grassroots effort. And they say in the United States that we're a very giving country, but it's small amounts.
Yeah, I live outside of Boulder, Colorado. It's sort of amazing. There's a lot of money here, and it's a shockingly stingy town. And we find that really amazing. People just, people, I think maybe there's a related. I think that the people who would otherwise give little don't, because they think that the people who have a lot of money are giving a lot, and they're not.
I think that's true. I think that's very true. Well, Stephen, this has been a wonderful conversation. So before I let you go, I have two questions. One is, how do people find you if they want to know more about you or they need to get some Xero shoes?
Well, hopefully not by stalking me. So in lieu of that, you can find us online, not surprisingly, at Xero Shoes. That's Xero Shoes, plural.com. Or on social, we're at Xero Shoes everywhere, or /Xero Shoes everywhere.
All right, that's awesome. So the last question is, we call the show Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do. So it's an entrepreneurial audience or a want-entrepreneurial audience.
Ooh.
What other thought would you say to people who are listening to this? What pearl of wisdom would you leave us?
A pearl of wisdom. Oh man, that's a pretty high bar. Here's the only one I can think of. My line is, what do I care what I think about me? And what that means is there's a lot of people who have this idea that you're supposed to have some particular feeling before you do something or while you're doing something. Like you're supposed to feel confident, or you're supposed to feel, I don't know, whatever it is, or think positive thoughts, or not think negative thoughts, whatever the hell those are. I don't even know what that means. But by and large, I just don't care what I think about me. I don't care if I'm confident, because I know that this thing could fall apart at any moment. I don't care if I think it's a great product, because the only people who will tell me if I'm right are the people who give me money. I don't care if I feel like I can't do it today. I still have to get up and go and do things. So I don't care what I think about me. And if you can stop caring about what you think about you and take the appropriate action, and that doesn't mean the best one, and it doesn't mean you're perfect every day. There's sometimes where I really crush it for a day, and then I know the next day I'm going to get nothing done. So, but more importantly, once you get over the idea of thinking that there's a particular way you need to be, or even a particular way you need to act, then you have the freedom to actually do what's next, and the freedom also to bail if it's not working and try something else without feeling like you're a problem. It's, again, back to that luck thing. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
When you touched on that part about if it's not working, bail and go do something else. I mean, every entrepreneur I know who has done it says they got to be able to pivot, right? You're going to fail at some things, but keep the momentum going and keep trying.
Yeah, that's it. Lena, early on in the business, Lena was upset one day. She said to me, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And I said, no one knows what they're doing. Even if someone came in because they had 40 years of footwear experience, what we're doing is different. And the universe has changed since they were doing it for the last 40 years. So our job isn't to know what we're doing. Our job is to walk in every day, find out what we don't know, and then learn it as fast as we can so that we can adapt and deal with it.
Well, Stephen, again, thank you so much for sharing your story and your wisdom with the listeners of the show. Appreciate having you.
My pleasure. And if you think anything I said was wise, you clearly misunderstood me.
Hey, and thank you to those of you who listened. I say it every show. If it wasn't for the audience, why would we even do this? So I really appreciate you. If you first time listening to the show, go back, listen to the archives. There's some other episodes with people who are just as cool as Stephen. I know you're thinking that can't be, but it's true. We have a lot of cool entrepreneurs who have come through the last 400 plus episodes. Please come back again and tell a friend. Most people tell me they found the show because somebody else they know listens to it. So the only way I'm going to be able to grow the show is if you go tell somebody, hey, check out this podcast. We're going to be back in a couple of days. But in the meantime, I'm going to challenge you to do two things. Number one, go out and try something new. If you want different results, you can't do the same things day after day. Try new things. And then while you're doing it, have a great day.
Thank you for being part of the Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do podcast. Without your participation and listening to these conversations, there is no show. Connect with Tom at tomsinger.com and follow him on Twitter at tomsinger.